Back then, in ancient time in Assyria, they began to see the constellations and how they affect us in our lives. But the most important thing was how spiritual this effect was. They began to see when the sun goes in a new constellation, things began to change. And that includes the weather and how nature reacted. So these Assyrian spiritual teachers began to count year by year and discovering that the sun only passed through the 12 constellations throughout the year. So they named this constellation from Aries to Pisces, according to how they saw the behavior manifested according to the sun being in those constellations. So the Assyrians were the first to discover the 12 constellations until the Assyrians were replaced by the Babylonians. Remember, the kingdom of the Assyrians were taken over by the Babylonians, and they become rulers over all the kingdom, including the Medes, the Assyrians, and it's all become one kingdom called Babylon. And the Babylonian took over the research of this wisdom of the 12 constellations. But the Babylonian began to see that the effect of these 12 constellations were a day-to-day effect, and it needed to be combining with the higher spirit of the Creator for this wisdom of the 12 constellations to work in a human life. And it just happened the Babylonian held these Jewish captive from Jerusalem, who were the rulers of the magicians and sorcerers and all type of wisdom that was part of the Babylonian kingdom. So, because Daniel was the chief ruler of the magician, and the Babylonians saw that combining the zodiac constellation with the higher spirit of the Creator, who was known as the God of Daniel, the constellation worked perfectly. And the Babylonian continued to track down the constellation day by day until the three magicians began to see in that year, in 1 BC, that there was a star of David. Remember, David was a Pisces, and these new scenarios never happens since the creation of human being. All the planets that were known to be planets on that time fell in Pisces, and that included the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. All 7 planets that could be seen with a naked eye were all in Pisces, and that was in March 1st, 1 BC. All the planets, including the moon, when it fell in Pisces, the magician of Babylon saw a star, and they knew it was the star of King David. They knew immediately that there was a king being born in Israel. Why in Israel? Because this star was the star of King David, and David was an Israelite. So they packed all they could and followed the star. This star was the 7th planet that was all in Pisces from March 1st in that year. So remember, they were not sure, but because this ancient wisdom has not been wrong for a very long time, they knew something big is happening in Israel, and they needed to see it with their own eyes. So when they came to Herod, they asked him, thinking because he was a king, maybe this king is born to Herod's house. But there was not a child born to Herod that year. And remember, it was not the first time Herod was told that a king of the Jews will be born. But it just happened the Babylonians have a record of tracking events before they happens using astrology. Remember, this is why the Bible called these magies or magician as they called them, as the wise men. And when Herod saw them, he knew this was the truth, and he was so afraid of his life and thought the throne of his kingdom will be taken away from him. So he just told them, when you see this child, come back to me so I can go to worship him too. But we know he was planning to kill the child. But this is to tell you how much the people of that time believe in this Babylonian wisdom. The biggest surprise of all was when the wise men already seen the child. The Bible said God warning them in a dream not to go back to Herod. Do you see? Babylonian astrology is a combination of ancient wisdom of the 12 constellations, combining together with the spirit of the God, the Creator. Otherwise, this wisdom cannot work as it is. They follow the Star of David. They knew that this was the truth based on ancient wisdom. And because they have been wise to understand that when God wants to do something among humanity, he put it first in the zodiac constellation, so the wise can see and get informed first before it happens. So you can see why I love Babylonian astrology, because it's perfect when it gets combined with God the Creator. And the opposite of the Babylonian astrology is Vedic astrology, because it gets combined by the demonic Hindu religion of these scary creatures that hunt down your soul at night. Many who call themselves astrologers are in Vedic astrology because their source of spiritual interpretation is wrong, and their interpretation of the zodiac end up becoming wrong too. It is not a secret that if the source of your information is wrong, the entire article is wrong, or the entire breaking news end up being wrong. So get out from this demonic astrology called Vedic astrology. If you love your soul and your destiny, go away from Vedic astrology. It will take your soul to a very bad place. But Babylonian astrology is a soul relaxer. It relaxes your soul when you are facing difficulty, and it shows you the way to spiritual wisdom. So find God and then combine him with Babylonian astrology. Remember, astrology alone, without God being that spirit bringing all the astrological interpretation to life, it is just a waste of time. Remember, astrology is the nature of the 12 constellations and their wisdom. And God is the one that created the 12 constellations to work for his will. So the wisdom of the 12 constellations without the God who created the 12 constellations is just like eating bread alone without peanut butter and jelly. The bread tastes like crap. Excuse my language, but you know this is true. This is your host, Gregory Kurbone, and I will be back with another episode of Ancient Wisdom.